What's going on, everyone? My name is Tenebrous Infinite, and just a little while ago I made a video on how the meta for Generation Zero has changed now with the introduction of experimental ammo. And that got me thinking, just how much has the meta actually changed? Is there some sort of a dramatic shakeup in the top 3 weapons to use? Do we have new, better options than the EXP, PVG, AG4, KVM, and KPIST? Or are they still just top of the meta with their own experimental ammo variations? Today, we're going to test these weapons out with 2 simple tests to see which weapon reigns supreme here in Generation Zero. In my last video, I had a few people ask what a meta was, and I thought it would be a good idea to refresh everyone quickly before we get to testing things here. So, meta is actually an acronym for the most effective tactics available, or meta for short. Essentially, these are the most effective combinations of in-game options from combat to strategy. And namely in GZ and most first-person shooters, the meta is defined by what the best guns are and what are the most effective guns in the game. Previously, GZ's top meta was the PVG for all-around kill potential, the KVM or AG4 for crowd control, and the KPIST for DPS. But that could be entirely different now. We could finally have a sidearm be top meta, or even a 5 crown weapon be top meta. We're going to be testing 6 guns today: the Clock, the AG4, the AI-76, the KVM, the KPIST, and the PVG, all at the highest crown level that they offer. I've got 2 tests, one being a face down with the Reaper, and the other being a crowd control test against Apocalypse machines. I've managed to cram a ton of useful info in here too about the fine details of each of these weapons, including the damage details on the explosions from explosive ammo, and the damage from both the tethers and the procs from shock ammo. So, let's get into things here. First up to bat is the Clock with the Shock, a nasty wombo combo of DPS output, stagger rate, and the nice added bonus of maybe EMPing machines. The EMP isn't something that you want to rely on, but when it pops up, it's super useful against everything except for the Reaper and Apocalypse class Harvesters. Those are the only 2 machines in the game that are immune to EMP effects at this current point in time. For crowd control, shock ammo is great. You can either set up shock tethers to take out ticks and kind of zone machines, or you can plant them on the ground and attach the procs directly to the machines. This makes taking out fast-moving targets super easy. Even if it isn't a clean shot, you'll usually take them out in 1 or 2 shock tethers. When it comes to individual damage, basic shock tethers do 3% damage to the overall health of a machine. You can see the overall health on the upper right hand side in the status section. It's actually pretty sizable when you consider the 9mm handgun bullets only do a bit over 1% to the overall health on their own. So you can dish out 4% damage per bullet that tethers on the machine. When you include the basic shock procs, it stacks up to 6% damage overall for the Clock. Now, the Reaper fight was where the Clock kinda suffered in comparison to other weapons. The Reaper is more armored than any other machine in the game, and if any of you dudes watched my new meta video, you'll know all experimental ammo is based off of the common ammo type for each experimental ammo variant. So the 9mm shock ammo is Full Metal Jacket. It took the longest out of all the weapons to down the Reaper, but at least it got the kill. Once all the shields were down, it was able to show off the DPS a little bit more efficiently. The biggest drawback the Clock has against the Reaper, though, is that nullification of its EMP effect. The fact that it can't EMP the Reaper means that you get no benefit from the experimental side of the Clock, and you might as well just be using a 5 crown Clock against the Reaper. But here you can see one of the main ways you can get the most out of your shock ammo is by kind of combining both the shock procs on the machine and some tethers on the ground as well. You'll just wind up maximizing the amount of DPS that you're getting out of your shock ammo by doing so. Next up, let's look at the experimental K-Pist with explosive rounds in it. Firstly, with the damage, because this was where I was actually surprised to see it be so little and so minimal. It's just 1% per laid explosive and 2% per procced explosive. Now, the thing is, the SMG isn't utilizing this as just one explosion at a time, unlike the PVG and the hunting rifle, the Mauser. It's multiple explosions at a time. But it still sadly doesn't really add up. If every shot was a guaranteed explosion, then it would be a hell of a weapon. But with it not having 100% efficiency, it's gonna be less effective than shock ammo is, which is just reliably able to shock machines every single time. Still though, it's pretty solid for crowd control and taking out weaker machines. And for stronger machines, though it has such weak damage per bullet and the explosions don't mean much in terms of damage output either, its ability to stagger lock bigger machines is still pretty useful. And if you combine placed explosives and impact explosives, you usually can dish out some pretty intense bouts of damage. The problem is, it's not quite as much damage as shock ammo can do, and with such expensive ammunition, the spray and pray approach can be way too costly for normal play. But still, the thing that I really love about explosive ammo is the fact that you can lay it down and use it very strategically. So you can place it on vehicles in order to set off vehicles and activate car traps. You can place it on the ground strategically in between a group of dogs like you're seeing me do here, and have those explosions go off to kind of chip away at the group. And you can also use the explosives to easily take care of ticks that are coming your way from hunters. But another kind of inherent downside to using the explosive ammo with the K-Pist, provided that spray and pray kind of mentality, is that a lot of times you're going to have shots that are going way off the mark due to the recoil system in Generation Zero. The recoil sometimes can send your bullet way off from where you think it's actually going to go. And because of that, those bullets add up gradually through each mag that you're shooting out, and those explosives will take up the amount of placed explosives that you can have in the world, that cap that we talked about in my new meta video. So having all of those wasted explosives sitting around and not doing anything, a lot of times can be a huge hindrance to the amount of damage potential that the experimental K-Pist can see with explosive ammo in comparison to those sniper rifles, where you're picking your shots and you're ensuring that at least every single shot is landing and you aren't wasting rounds. So as you can see here, the experimental K-Pist wasn't even able to actually get the kill confirm on the Reaper, which is a shame because even the clock was able to do that. And I think that that just correlates to the low amount of damage potential you're getting from that explosive ammo, and also all of the wasted explosives that you're going to have along the way when you're fighting against tanks and harvesters, but primarily tanks, because tanks tend to be a little bit more mobile than harvesters are. Now, for the AI-76, its shock tethers do 6% damage, and this has me figuring shock tethers are probably related to the damage from the bullet and the weapon itself, seeing as it did double the damage of the clock. Then in burst, it did 18% damage, which is completely obscene. Now, I'm sure I don't have to tell you dudes this, but 18% damage from a single burst is, like, that's a lot of damage.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Now, when it comes to crowd control for the AI-76, it's pretty dang good. Because of its really high damage output, you're able to keep most machines under control, because you'll be able to take out doggos and hunters and even tanks and harvesters just really quickly and really efficiently. As well, the general benefit of shock ammo is that staggering effect, and being able to stagger the bigger machines while you're applying that high amount of damage is just absolutely deadly. And when it comes to the Reaper, it's, again, much of a similar story. The AI-76 just ate through the Reaper because that burst fire is so controllable, so you can just train that burst fire on each of his shield generators and have really accurate shock tethers going through his whole body the whole time. It's just absolutely deadly to the Reaper. Like, genuinely, my dudes, I've had a lot of fights with the Reaper, probably more than the average person has, and I've never had such a one-sided fight against this guy. Honestly, the AI-76 just chewed him up and spat him right back out. Now, next up, we're going to talk about the AG4, and its shock tethers are a little bit different than the clocks or the AI-76's. Its shock tethers actually will deal incendiary damage to the machines, so it'll light them on fire, and also it seems like the shock procs have like a bit of a small explosive effect, which definitely, when we look at the damage output, we're going to see a little bit of a difference between the AI-76's shock procs and the AG4's. The AG4, basically, there isn't too much else to say about this that's different than the AI-76. It does basically the exact same thing, except for with fire. So, the way the damage counts out for the AG4 is the shock tether itself does 4 damage, and again will ignite the enemy, so it'll do a little bit of chip damage above that 4% over time. But then, the real spot where the AG4 gets super interesting is with its shock procs that cause those small explosions. These cause 8% damage on their own, which that's a lot of damage right there. That's way more than what even the AI-76 was doing, because when you start to stack up all of those shock procs over time, you wind up doing just like insane amounts of damage. So, as you'd expect, the AG4 did quite well against the Reaper. Again, just having those shock tethers to do that staggering and all of that damage, alongside the general damage output that the AG4 has. It, again, just made absolute light work, just like the AI-76 did. Personally, I preferred the AI-76 for the Reaper fight, but that was just because that burst fire allowed me to train my shots on those shield generators a little bit more efficiently. I'm kind of curious what you dudes think about this whole, like, sway motion that happens from, the AG4's shock rocks. I really like it. I think it's a good balancing factor to the amount of power that the AG4 has behind those shock rocks. And the visual effect, to me at least, is actually kind of cool. Time-wise, it was a little bit faster taking down the Reaper with the AI-76, but I think that partly is because I was really trying to utilize the trench a lot when I was fighting with the AG4. This kind of trench area of the farmlands is a fantastic spot to fight the Reaper. If you ever get a Reaper nearby that spot, try to drag him on over to it, because it changes the fight in a huge way. And for the second last gun of the day, the EXP KVM with the shock bullets. Instead of having shock tethers, the KVM has better chain lightning capabilities. And I think I've knuckled out what those capabilities are specifically. What it seems to me is that the chain lightning now will do increased damage the more it chains. It still has relatively low damage output on one specific machine, but if you have a whole bunch together, that chain lightning gets pretty dang powerful. So this is probably the closest we've had so far to a gun that sticks to the old meta. The EXP KVM with shock ammo and with tar ammo functions just like how it did before the update, just with some slight differences in how the chain lightning behaves. So I guess the real question is, with the experimental KVM, is whether or not it still holds up to these other guns now that have gotten very proficient boosts to them. And I mean, it's still a dang good gun. EXP KVM was top of the meta before all of this, and it still sits really high up on the meta. I do think that it's been bumped down quite a few pegs due to the improvements on other weapons, but it still is an absolutely great weapon. It's a Reaper killer. It's great for taking down all of the doggos he summons, and it's great for dealing with harvesters with their hunter call-ins. And the improved shock damage is pretty good, even though it's not as tactile as the other ammo types. You could still use it in pretty intelligent ways, like say if you have a bunch of enemies around a really big enemy, instead of shooting that really big enemy, you might want to shoot the smaller enemies to get that stronger shock tether off to that big enemy. So here's a bit of footage just showing that the chain lightning on the KVM still does a very minuscule amount of damage to that single first enemy that you originate the chain lightning from. But the chain lightning gets stronger as it links to more machines in the location. So in this example here, you can see that when I shot that first shot and the bullet collided with the enemy, and then the chain lightning happened, it required both of those instances in order to do 1% of damage. Whereas when I shot the doggo and there was 2 seekers off to the side and the tank off to the other side, it wound up doing 1% damage as just the lightning bolt in itself. Really though, in the end, these 1% and less than 1% amounts of damage from the KVM's shock lightning is really nothing in comparison to the 18 and the 8% from the AI-76 and the AG4 with the shock ammo. Really, the KVM hasn't seen much of a benefit from the experimental ammo, whereas all of the other weapons saw massive benefits. So now for the last gun of the day, and I guess one of the real big questions of this video. Is the experimental PVG still top meta? And the explosive ammo can leave a little bit to be desired for, but when you get a good flow of explosions on a tank or a harvester, it feels dang good. Like the KVM before it, the explosive ammo doesn't change things for the PVG too much, just makes it have a little bit more oomph to its shots. And just like the explosive Capist, it could be used to detonate vehicles or set traps for machines to run into. And if you wind up killing a machine in one shot, then its corpse has a small proximity bomb left on it for the other machines. A big thing to keep in mind that I learned the hard way here with the PVG is that you destroy components a little bit faster than usual due to that secondary explosion that happens pretty frequently. So you need to swap components a little bit faster than usual, which can take some getting used to. Swapping components allows you to maximize your damage potential here, so you don't want to just blast away like I'm doing in the video. I was primarily just trying to see if that explosion proc could take out the tank, which it eventually did. So for the damage counts, the placed explosives do 2% damage, whereas the procced explosives do 8% damage. Really, you want to be aiming more often to be doing the procced explosives with the experimental PVG as opposed to the placed explosives, unlike with the SMG where you wanted kind of a mix of the two. With the PVG, you want to just kind of use this like a cannon. So for a final little bit of information about the explosive from the experimental PVG, I'm sure that a lot of people are confused because of the PVG's piercing function. So I'm going to demonstrate on this building because buildings kind of carry around similar physics or properties as the armor and the components of a machine. So you could see when I shoot the wall here, there is only one explosive and it does not pierce through to the other side. But you can see when I shoot the door, it pierces through not only the first door, but the second door in behind it. Now, I can't quite tell you what on a machine will behave like the wall and what on a machine will behave like the door, but the main thing to pay attention to is the fact that there's always an explosive on that first initial point of impact. So no matter what, you're going to have an explosive on that first point of impact. But if it procs off to be an actual explosion is the real question when you're getting a direct hit on the machine. When it comes to fighting the Reaper, the PVG still kicks the Reaper's ass the same as it always does. It's kind of funny, whenever you have a loadout, the optimal loadout at least for fighting the Reaper, you generally will have the KVM or the AG4. But the PVG as your long-range weapon is pretty much every top player's go-to. Every long-time player's go-to, I would say without a doubt. So, for a quick intermission about the PVG killing the Reaper, because I'm sure that's not brand new news to anybody watching this video, you can actually hide behind these incredibly tiny rocks if you go prone behind them and just like smush your face right up to them, and it works really well for avoiding the Reaper's thermobaric. Now you can see all of these explosions happening shortly after I've shot the Reaper, and these sadly are not the explosions that deal a large amount of damage. These are the ones that just deal a small amount of damage. What's happening is the landmine is being made, but instead of it being like, hey, I should be the big boom, it just winds up being the little boom. There's a bit of a different sound effect that plays between the two explosions. The bigger explosion, the explosion that happens on proc, or on contact, makes kind of like a cannonball sound, whereas the placed mines just make kind of like a dull thud when they're far away from you. The added benefit of the stagger from both of the explosions, though, can help the PVG along a little bit too. The more the machine is staggered, the easier it is to pick out those components. As per usual, taking out the Reaper with the PVG is exactly what it was meant to do. The explosions help a bit with splash damage and bonus damage to components, and the stagger helps along nicely too. So, if I had to choose a top meta here for Generation Zero, I'd say it'd go AG4, AI76, PVG, Clock, KVM, and then lastly Capist for a kind of top 6 in the meta. AG4 purely due to those explosions and how fast they add up, but really the AI76 is neck and neck with the AG4 because of that burst fire. Then the good old PVG would be in third place now. It kind of lacks the style, the damage output, and the multiple applications that the AG4 and the AI76 can perform now. Then the Clock, partially because some machines are immune to EMPs, partially because the EMPs still don't happen quite enough to be reliable, and partially because it lacks the damage output of the other two rifles. Then for 5th place, the KVM because, well, it's still just the KVM, but a little bit cooler now. And then, lastly, the Capist, which has fallen a long way down from being almost top of the meta to being the worst of the best in the game. Still not a bad gun at all, and great for what it's great at, but it hasn't been boosted up anywhere close to weapons with shock ammo. So, let me know, do you think that this is an accurate representation of the current meta here in Generation Zero? Do you have maybe a different top 6 for the meta? Let me know all of your thoughts and feelings down in the comment section below. But for now, I've been Tenebris, you've been awesome, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all in the next one. Until then, peace out my dudes.